Okay, so monitoring, evaluation and assessment. So today we're going to touch on sustainability monitoring. How do we monitor sustainability throughout a project, okay, at each stage? We're going to touch on sustainability evaluation. How do we evaluate how we've actually achieved, what we've achieved throughout the course of the project? How do we assess our level of success? We're going to look at indicators of sustainability and sustainability reporting and try and kind of get across to you the differences between monitoring and evaluation, because they're often used synonymously, but they do mean different things. And we're going to concentrate a little bit around the indicators. So how do we actually know our project is sustainable? What can we look at? What can we measure? How can we tell? And that's a difficult thing to do. And then look at reporting. So over the last few weeks or so, we've been looking at the various stages: initiation, planning, execution, closing. And we're going to look today to this monitor controlling. 15% of your effort, according to the PMI best practice, should go into monitoring and controlling. And yet this is one of the things that isn't always done very well in projects. We're very good at actually planning, scheduling and carrying out the work, but we're not very good at stopping and taking a look and stepping back and seeing if we actually are going the right way. Project managers are very good at putting the blinkers on and just running straight to the finish line, okay? And not looking left or right to see if what they've achieved is actually what they set out to do. And that's why we have a very high percentage of project failure, okay? Project overruns, cost overruns, project time overruns, because we failed to stop and take some sense of what we're actually doing. Okay, so monitoring. So what is monitoring? Monitoring is a way of keeping track of your progress, okay? The implementation process. You spent all this time doing your planning and making sure that you understand what you need to do and when, but you don't stop on monitoring if you're actually achieving these goals step by step. It involves watching the progress of the project against goals and deliverables. How far are we going towards resource minimization? How far are we getting towards energy efficiency? And it's the periodic checking of progress against work targets. Okay, and we really aren't good at that in projects, believe it or not. Making sure we're actually going in the right direction. Sustainability monitoring is just simple, same as every other kind of monitoring process. The only difference is we're just talking about different metrics and different indicators. So it's the monitoring and development of a strategy for sustainability from the core of the project or program of management. It commences from the implementation stage, so we should start monitoring from the day we start the project, not halfway 50% through or 80% through, from the very day that we start. Not all dimensions of sustainability will be resolved initially though. Some actual things, energy consumption, climate change, mitigation, some of the things you're trying to achieve will show themselves only after the end of the project. Some of them will show themselves early, some in the middle. So we have to understand that. So for that case, it's important to monitor at regular intervals. Some project management bodies of knowledge and some processes, some governance processes, such as the Prince 2, for instance, will have things like gateways built in, hard built in. So in a certain amount of weeks you have to pass a gateway. So you have to stop, evaluate, monitor, get that signed off before you can actually move on and carry on with the project. So if you're using a specific methodology, sometimes that will help you. So it's about commencing from the start of the project. Not everything will reveal itself at the start. So for example, the economic and environmental dimension of sustainability would reveal themselves a bit later on in the project, okay? 6 months, a year, depending on the length of your project. So we often say that sustainability can be more capitally expensive at the start, needs more initial investment, but the economic gains that you get from waste minimisation, resource minimisation, etc. will come later on. So it's no good looking for economic gains in the first kind of few weeks. Okay, you have to understand that some of these things will come later. But continuous attention to the kind of sustainability issues, the logistics, community, institutional, will help you detect any deviations at an early stage and introduce corrective measures ahead of time. So if you're monitoring effectively, you're actually taking the chance to step back and say, are we going in the right direction here? And only then can you say, no, we're not, we need to deviate. And again, project managers aren't good at that. They're very good at just carrying on blindly and forgetting about it and throwing more resources into it, thinking it doesn't matter, it'll be better if we put more people on, put more money on, when really what you should be doing is stopping, taking a day, maybe moving in a different direction. So monitoring is a very important skill to have. So here's some suggested steps for monitoring. You need to identify what you're going to manage, when, involved in planning and implementation. When are you going to actually monitor? You need to identify within your project plan, your Gantt chart if you like, where are you going to stop? Where are you going to monitor that project? Is it going to be weekly, monthly, fortnightly, yearly? Depends on the length of your project. Identify which items you need feedback on. So, for instance, you're probably familiar with things like critical success factors. Okay, what is the real way you're going to measure success in this project? And that's what you're going to need feedback on. If a measure of success is reduced waste, that's something you need to monitor. If it's increased energy efficiency, that's something you have to monitor. So you have to know what you're going to monitor, as well as when. You need to develop how you're going to report this. Okay, it's no good as a project manager monitoring your performance and then not kind of communicating it onwards. So you need to understand if you're going to communicate that amongst your team. You're going to have a team brief, team meeting. You're going to have a website that everyone can log on to. You're going to communicate that externally. If you're in a sustainability project, you should always be transparent. So maybe you'll monitor your progress externally. Maybe stakeholders, community can look and see where you're at and check that you are doing what you said you were going to do. You need to determine the periodicity of the reporting, when you're going to actually do it, what time. And you need to find out who's responsible for different levels. Is it you as a project manager? Or are you going to be a leader and delegate that down? Is it going to be functional managers? Is it somebody who's in charge of the IT in the project? Someone who's in charge of the construction? Who is going to actually report? And you have to work with them to understand how they monitor and how they report their progress. My advice would be, if you're on a big project, is you want to set these levels and you want to have your team reporting into you at certain intervals, so you have a nice overview of where everybody is, where everyone's working. You need to understand how you're going to process and analyse these reports. Are you going to get a nice report? I've seen these quite often at Prince 2 level. Okay? The project manager produces his report, which it says in week 6 of the Prince 2 manual, you have to produce this monitoring report. They produce it, they give it to someone, they put it in a drawer and they walk away. Okay? You've actually got to do something with it. Okay? And I've seen people pull these out of the drawers when the project's been going wrong and say, well, we monitored it, look. We monitored it. Look, I've got 3 weeks of monitoring here, gateway 1, gateway 2. And what did you do with that? Well, we monitored it. It's no good unless you actually follow up on what you're monitoring. And identify the critical and unreliable areas in implementation. What are the difficult things that you need to worry about? And provide feedback to corrective measures. So again, what you should have done with that report is not put it in your drawer, but kind of decide and almost do a counter report. Okay, this is where we're going to go now. We need to change this. We need to deviate. We need to move. And of course, that has implications for your project board or your project client. You need to go back to your client or your board and say, we've been looking at what we're doing. We're not quite hitting where we should be. One of the ramifications is we need to do this, or we need more money, we need less money, or etc., etc. So we need to work with external people as well. Monitoring, extremely important to ensure that we actually end up going in the direction that we've set ourselves. Okay, so what about evaluation? How does that differ from monitoring? Okay, so evaluation is finding the value of something, is a definition that I kind of found up. Are we on the course? Here's the latest evaluation. It's an assessment as to whether the practice activities conform with standards. It's a study and review of past operating performance. So where monitoring is kind of ongoing, okay, evaluation is kind of almost looking back a little bit, okay? Looking back to where you've been and making sure that you were on the right course from the start. So evaluating project results is helpful in providing answers to questions such as, what progress has been made so far? Okay? Status report, status report. You know, your client or your project board, where are we now? What have we done? How much have we achieved? How are we acting against our KPIs? Is everything on course? Were the desired outcomes achieved? Why? If they weren't achieved, why not? So if we were successful in reducing this energy source, reducing this resource use, why? What did we do that actually made that work? We've got to capture that. People forget to capture the good things that have happened. Evaluation is sometimes seen as a negative. I'm going to evaluate your work. I'm going to evaluate your performance. But it's not. It should be a positive as well. Okay? So we need to look at what's actually being achieved and look at why, so we can use those positives and put them back in. Do the project results justify the inputs? We've put £1 million into reducing waste in this project, but we've only reduced waste by 10%. Okay, so is that a good use of resources? Cost-benefit analysis. We need to be honest with ourselves and say, okay, so maybe waste minimisation wasn't a good thing to do. We spent £1 million for nothing. But you can only understand this once you've looked back and evaluated, hindsight. And are there any ways that the project activities can be refined to achieve better outcomes? So one of the things that you might talk about, I don't know if Robert or Michelle will talk about, is knowledge management. Okay? And again, our industry generally, as a profession, isn't very good at knowledge management. We make the same mistakes quite often, over and over and over again. And those of you that work in the construction industry, we've been doing that for, it's almost like inbred into us. Okay, so we need to evaluate, we need to see what went wrong so we don't keep doing the same thing wrong again and again. So some things we need to do, we need to find out exactly what we're evaluating. So a bit like monitoring, we have to understand what we need to look at, what we don't need to look at. We only need to evaluate the critical success factors, the critical things. We're not evaluating what time people turn up for work or things like that. You know, that's not important. So we need to evaluate what the important things are. We need to understand exactly what success looks like. Okay? And that sounds like a daft thing. People say, well, I know what success looks like. Yeah, we bring our project in on time, on budget, with the required quality. Maybe, or maybe there's other measures of success. Maybe, again, one of the sustainability criteria is your measure of success. But you need to understand, people need to know what that means. You have to understand what information you have, or you could get, to show how successful you've been. Something you guys are thinking about for your thesis, some of you are doing your dissertations coming up, is thinking about what data you can get. Okay? And quite often it's difficult to get the data that you need to prove your thesis, your hypothesis. But if we can try to build that in at an early stage in the project, make sure you're actually producing the data that you need, so when you come to evaluate, it's there for you. Sounds like a no-brainer, but again, it's uncommon to actually start producing the data that you need to evaluate at the end. And being realistic, what resources do you have for evaluation? Do you need to do it externally, internally? Have you got the skills? You need to send people on training exercises to do that. You need to understand that. Sometimes it's self-evaluation, sometimes from outside. I would always say, if you can, if you're running a major project, do an external evaluation. Pay a consultant if need be. Get somebody, fresh pair of eyes, to come and have a look at your project. Or somebody from another part of the organisation. Because if you're evaluating your own work, if I asked you to mark your own assessments, I'm sure your evaluation would be slightly more generous than maybe it should be. Because it's human nature, you'd mark yourself higher than you probably should do. So get somebody from externally to come and look at your work, to come and look at your project. Fresh pair of eyes. So how do we evaluate? Is it really difficult? Is it so hard to do? Well, no, that's the annoying thing. It's a very easy thing to do. Checklists. First form of evaluation. Okay, have I achieved this? Yes. Have I done that? Yes. Walk around the floor. Has this happened? Has this happened? Very simple checklist. I've got a friend who's I'm working with at the moment who's an environmental manager. He designs these kind of checklists for big energy companies. Okay, so he goes into the energy companies, he looks at their environmental plans, what they're trying to do, and designs these. They can be quite complex checklists, so they can evaluate and monitor their performance over time. So there's a job in there for people designing checklists. Feedback forms. I'm going to evaluate this course in a week's time. I'm going to give you all a feedback form. Not on paper, of course. I'm going to give you an electronic one because it's the 21st century after all. And you're going to fill in that form and give me some feedback on what you thought was good, what you thought was bad. And it's anonymous, so you can be as rude as you like, but I will hunt you down if I find out. But you're going to evaluate my performance to a degree, and the performance of this program, and the performance of this module, and only then can I start to improve it for next year's delivery, etc., etc. So feedback forms. You can have all manner of statistical reports nowadays that come out, from databases, which you can use to quantitatively analyse your performance. And we have bespoke tools, which are designed specifically for projects. I've done a few of these myself in some consultancy that I've done. So you can make bespoke tools that are specialist to your particular one project. So some examples of some tools that are out there. Project assessment. Okay, similar to monitoring and evaluation. Monitoring is kind of ongoing, evaluation is looking back. Assessment can be at either stage, really. But the point of assessment is it checks you off against a range of indicators. So as I was saying, how do we know what success looks like? How do we know that we're achieving certain things? We need to have an indicator. Sustainability indicators are notoriously difficult to come up with. Some of them are easy. Water use. How do I indicate whether I've reduced water use? Okay, the volume of flow or amount of cubic meters I've used on the project. But how do you evaluate whether you've increased in capacity in your community? How do you evaluate whether you've met some of these more social aspects of sustainability? It's very, very difficult to do. So there's books and books and papers and papers and papers on sustainability evaluation and indicators. And the interesting thing about using indicators at an early stage is it may inform the development of alternative strategies. If you are thinking about setting up a monitoring and assessment culture, when setting it up within your process, when you start looking at indicators, you may think about doing something differently to match your indicators, if that makes sense. You maybe see that in a little bit. Okay, so there's a lot of tools out there. This is a Spanish tool, EcoCompass, developed by, what's that, Fundación Entorno. Who's Spanish? Is that right? Is that right? See, I should never try accents or, well, I'm not going to do accents. It's one of the assessment tools that can be used to graphically represent improvements in process and product design. Okay, so used like in manufacturing. And they have these 6 indicators. They look at the intensity of raw material use. So water, plastics, oil, whatever it is you're using. Not plastics, that's not raw material. Any raw material, elemental material. Intensity of energy consumption. They look at the generation of liquid, solid and air emissions, efficiency in the transportation of the products, content of toxic substances in the product, and the durability and functionality of the product or service. So what they're looking at these broad indicators to try to say whether or not this particular product or service is, in inverted commas, sustainable. But then there's assessment tools for construction. And the reason I'm showing this, even though you're not all construction guys, is there are a lot of them. Construction seems to be an area that we do a lot of sustainability assessment. Not wonderfully good at building sustainable buildings at the moment, but we do have a lot of assessment for it. It's one thing, it's one part of the industry that is working. So we have BREEAM, which is the Building Research Establishment Environmental Assessment Method. It rates a building on a scale of good to outstanding in terms of its environmental performance. We have Green Star, the Code for Sustainable Homes, which works on housing. We have LEED, which is American, Leadership in Energy Efficient Design. We have CASB, which is a Japanese standard. Can't say it because it's in Japanese. But the point is we have these indicators, these tools, which we can apply to projects and services and products to give us an indication of how sustainable we think they are. So it's an indication, it's never an answer. We have these bespoke tools. This is one I created. It's called the PFI Sustainability Tool. It was generated to try to help us choose from 5 consortia of building design teams who were bidding for a £300 million housing project. And the client, who was a local authority, wanted to understand if they were to pick one of these groups, which one would deliver the most sustainable set of buildings. And we couldn't use the existing tools like BREEAM and Code for Sustainable Homes. They didn't apply very well to this particular method. And also the local authority wanted to make some tweaks. So the problem with some of these generic tools like BREEAM, Code for Sustainable Homes, EcoCompass, is they apply to everything. They assume that sustainability means the same thing to absolutely everybody. But of course it doesn't. It's dependent on the community, on the location, on the client. And so the tool that we developed allowed local authorities and clients to decide what was their focus. So if you look at this section in the top right, for instance, if I can zoom in. How do you zoom in? There we go. These are the indicators that we use: energy, health and well-being, socio-economic factors, water, materials and waste, transport, ecology and pollution. And depending on which authority was using it, they could tweak that. So in the northeast, for instance, water is not so much of an issue for us, perhaps. Energy is a big issue because we're a more deprived part of the world, part of the country in terms of incomes and poverty. So energy is a bigger issue than water. Southeast of England, the opposite. Slightly more affluent part of the country, water is a massive problem. So we could weight accordingly these tools, and we could decide during the project which was most important to us. And then what these tools do, and what this tool does, it broke that down further. So in energy, we were looking at various indicators. So it might be energy efficiency, the amount of renewable energy used, for instance. We looked at social economic factors, whether or not we did post-occupancy evaluation, whether we did educational plans, etc., across all of these indicators. And the way that we used it was, we sat down with design teams, and they put forward their plans for what they wanted to do. We ran it through this tool and said, okay, well, based on what you say you're going to do, this is where our indicators sit. And then we could work with them and say, look, you're looking really good, you're doing a great job on your energy reduction and your water. You need to maybe focus a little bit more on your social and economic well-being within this project. The teams we were working with, they loved this. I thought they wouldn't like it. Oh, you're trying to tell us what to do. But they liked it. They had a client who said, this is where we want to go. You develop this with us, we'll work with you to help you, and then we'll see who comes out the best at the end. So it was a really good tool, it worked very well. And it was a good way of demonstrating what the performance was. We'll talk about indicators a bit more in a sec. But there are some big challenges in monitoring, assessment, evaluation and assessment. You've got to get the commitment to do it, okay? Not all project teams, not all clients will want you to monitor and assess what they're doing. It can be a bit scary, okay? And it's a problem I've come up against in construction again. You know, I'm going to come and I'm going to monitor how sustainable your project is for your building, Mr. Developer. What are you looking at what we're doing? What if we're not doing it right? What if there's a problem? People can get a bit nervous. Are you going to tell the world that we're not really performing against what we should be performing against? So you have to get the buy-in to do it, okay? And it's not always easy to do that. You have to establish baselines. So what is sustainable and what is not? So we're reducing water use. So what is a good use of water use? You know, what's the baseline for my project in my industry? You have to know what they are. It's no good just putting an arbitrary figure out of the hat. You have to know what your industry is doing and try to beat the kind of best practice. And sometimes that isn't always readily available. You have to identify realistic quantitative and qualitative indicators. There's a little bit, we're going to talk about indicators in a minute. So how do we know that we're reducing water or we're increasing capacity? How do we know? How do we come up with those? We need to find the time to do it and stick to it. So again, I've been in projects before where we've had monitoring phases quite clearly put in, but we're running a bit late and the project's got to be delivered, so maybe we'll just forget about the monitoring and we'll just keep steaming forward. That is classic when projects fail. Okay, you should always take the time to stop and have a look. Don't just carry on blinkered. Getting feedback from your stakeholders, you might need to talk to the people you work with in order to see if these indicators are working. So going out to the community, sometimes they won't want to talk to you. Again, the situation I've been in, you've got a jacket on with a hard hat. It says local council on it, and you walk into a community and they go, oh, what's this about my bins? There was a car burning over there last week. What's this about these hooligans? They don't want to talk to you about the things you want to talk about. So it's sometimes difficult to get feedback from your stakeholders. And how do you report back to them? Okay, and it's critical. You must report back to your stakeholders. Okay, so let's touch on indicators because it's a difficult thing to do. So what is an indicator and why do we use them? Speed indicators, heat indicators. It's an instrument which gives us information. Simple as that. The old saying, we measure what we value and we value what you measure. So we cannot improve on something unless we measure it. We can't tell if we're achieving the economic savings unless we have a benchmark and we manage that and we know what it is, we target ourselves against it. So there are different types of indicators. There are direct ones. These are easy. So we refer directly to the subject they've been developed for. They directly pinpoint the subject of interest, and this is very good with technical things, okay? So what the manager wants to know can be measured directly. The amount of greenhouse gas emitted as a result of project activities. Very easy to do, okay? Reduction in travel distance, very simple one. Okay, direct indicator. The amount of miles we've travelled in our cars, add them all up. That's our travel distance, okay? Very easy, simple to do. So indicators like that are used commonly. So where possible, we always try to use direct indicators. But sometimes we need to use these indirect ones, and this is where the problem starts to get a bit more difficult. So we often call them proxy indicators. So they refer an indirect date to the subject of interest. So there can be several reasons for these. The subject of interest cannot be directly measured. So things like behavioural change. How do you measure behavioural change? How do you measure living conditions standards? How do you measure good governance? Okay, it's all a bit woolly. So you have to find a way to try to do that by looking slightly off centre. So the use of an indirect indicator can be more cost effective than a direct one. It may be cheaper to actually analyse that than it is to actually measure it with a physical measurement. So for instance, another thing we do is increasing natural daylight in building design can be a proxy indicator for improvement in health. So it's difficult perhaps to measure occupant health, but we know that the more natural daylight people get, the more healthier they are. We know that, we've done a lot of studies on that, it's something that we understand quite well. So we can arguably say that by measuring the amount of natural daylight, we can safely say that's going to improve occupant health to a degree. So they're not ideal, but they do give some indication of what's happening. Again, how do we measure our performance against, in the local economy? If one of our social sustainability, economic sustainability outcomes is to provide more employment to the contribute to the local economy, it's difficult to do that, but a proxy indicator can be the number of local employees. So if you say on our project we've employed 50% of our team are local employees, therefore you can argue that it creates a contribution to local economy. Sustainability indicators, there's, like I said, the literature, there's so much literature on sustainability indicators coming out your ears. Everybody seems to have a view on it, which is what makes it difficult. So on the left, here's some indicators from a consultancy called Sustaianble. They're run by John Elkington, who wrote the book Cannibals with Forks. Came up with a triple bottom line concept, as you all know, of course, because you've all read all the notes and everything. And he kind of talks about ethics, values and principles, accountability, transparency, focusing on environmental processes, all these kind of things. We have the Global Reporting Initiative, which is a global standard for how you report sustainability. And then you look at things like more direct, materials, energy and water, biodiversity, suppliers, transport. Look at child labour, indigenous rights, community impact. We've got the Environmental Sustainability Index, another European published tool, which looks at things like air quality, biodiversity, land, and then we've got an academic study at the end who's come up with their own. So there are various different ways we could try to measure sustainability issues. There's no right or wrong answer, and you have to choose what is right for your project. So going back to the tool that I worked on, I created, these are some of the things, the indicators that we came up with. So for carbon emissions at the top there, the aim was to design and develop buildings that minimises carbon emissions. And one of the things we came up with what the indicator was. In construction you have something called the dwelling emission rate. So you decide how much your building is going to use in terms of energy. You model it out, you build it in a computer. Then you have a target emission rate. So you have a reduction by a certain percentage. And so our indicator was, what is that percentage? And with the way we were going to measure that, we were going to have evidence demonstrated to us from the outputs of these computer programs, and then we could score them depending on how well they did. So we can come up with an indicator system that says, if you provide a 10% reduction of carbon, you get 1 point, 20% 2 points, 30% 3 points, example, okay? And what this allowed was developers to kind of play off economically and say, okay, we're going to go for a 6% reduction, how much will that cost us? It's too expensive, but let's go with a 50. They could pitch themselves across the entire project of where they would be. Maybe another example is an easy one. Building fabric. We know that building fabric in construction, so the walls, the windows, the doors, the ceilings, we know that the better quality they are in terms of reducing energy transmission across them, the more energy efficient a building will be, the less expensive it will be to heat, and the more carbon we will save. And that's measured directly in something called a U value. And again, we could set those targets and say if your U value is this, you score 1 point, this, 2 points. So we can measure directly some of these aspects in this tool. I haven't got the social ones. I should have put the social ones. The social ones were much more difficult. A lot of these tools that exist, such as BRIAM, Co-Sustainable Homes, don't really measure social sustainability because it's difficult again. And so some of the tools that we used were, again, contribution to the local economy, to the amount of local workers was one of the things we used, and also the transport distance of suppliers. Okay? So we tried to use suppliers within a certain radius. So the closer the supplier was to our economic area, our borough, the more points you scored because you were keeping your money within the borough. So there are ways of doing that. Another one we had was the ability to invite the community into a building. Okay, so we were looking at ways of designing buildings that we're inviting for people to come into, and for people to come out of. So there are ways of doing it, but it is difficult. There are billions of these indicators all over the place. This is another set here. This is looking at ozone depletion, forests, freshwater, oceans, governments. They're all over the place. One of the things I will say from experience is, the things that you have to do is, you have to be relevant and meaningful with your indicators. They have to measure what you need them to measure, okay? They have to be relevant. It's no good measuring, I don't know, ozone depletion, which is the hole over the ozone layer. Nothing to do with climate change at all, okay? It's to do with the amount of ultraviolet radiation that hits the Earth. It's a problem for us in terms of things like skin cancer and stuff like that in the Northern Hemisphere, okay? So we're not going to measure ozone depletion if we're looking at climate change, okay? So it's making sure they're relevant and they're meaningful. They've got to inform decision making to improve the performance of the organisation. You've got to measure things that you can actually change, okay? So again, it's no use measuring something that you do not have the ability within your organisation to change, because all you're going to say is, well, we're not achieving that. There's nothing we can do about it. You need to recognise the inherent diversity of business. So I guess what I mean by that is, one indicator doesn't fit every single project, doesn't fit every single sector. It has to be bespoke. We need to support benchmarking and monitoring over time. We need to be clearly defined, measurable, transparent and verifiable. This is something that I was very hot on the tool I created that you saw before. I was very aware from other work I'd done that if I went to a particular developer or a particular industry guy and said, okay, we're measuring you on this, and this is how we're measuring on you, he'd say, well, who are you to decide what the best practice use for the amount of water that you can use in a building is? And I'd say, well, I haven't decided that. What's been decided through this government standard here, this industry standard here, these 3 academic papers. And so all of the evidence, the indicators, nothing to do with me. What I did was pull the best practice evidence together and put it in one place. And you can't, and I used to say, well, if you've got a problem with that, don't argue with me. Argue with the government, or argue with these academics who've come up with that system. Okay? All we're doing is applying it. So if you come up with an indicator, it has to be verifiable. You can't just pluck it out of your head and say that's the figure we're going for, because that makes you look stupid. That wasn't the word I was going to look for. But it doesn't make you look good. Okay? It doesn't make you look credible. That's a better word. They need to be understandable and meaningful to identified stakeholders. So if you're talking to the local community about how you're going to reduce their energy, you're going to reduce their energy bills. So you're saying, well, we're progressing towards our indicators to make sure that we're going to reduce your energy use. And we've reduced your energy use by 0.25 kilowatt per hour over per metre squared of your building. What? No, you want to use verifiable, you want to use ones that they can understand. We've reduced your energy bill by £6 per week. Okay? They need to be under the direct control of what you can do. So either what you can do as a project team or what you can do as an organisation. It's no good coming up with an idea to try to indicate that you need to make a change if that change needs to be done at government level, for instance. It's not going to happen. And they need to recognise upstream and downstream aspects of the company's activities. So they need to be top down. What is the organisation looking to do? That's why indicators are set on what they think we should do. And they need to be bottom up. What do your team think we should do? They're the guys working on the ground. They often have better ideas than the guys at the top. Okay, we'll just quickly touch on sustainability reporting. So you've done all this brilliant stuff in your project. It's fantastic. You've really come up with a sustainable project. Your indicators, your monitoring, your evaluation is saying, well done, you've reduced the overall environmental impact, whatever, of this project massively. Then's the time to shout about it, okay? That's the time to go out and say, look how good I am. Well, no, look how good our team is. We delegate it down, of course. You stand at the back, the team get the photo. Okay, look how good we are, look how good we've done. So transparency is a key part of reporting. So reporting eco-efficiency publicly is a good way to communicate your corporation's progress on sustainable goals. This is good for your corporate social responsibility. Your investors like it. Corporate reports say how sustainable you are. Your consumers like it. They know that they're buying from an ethical company. The interest groups like it. The insurers even like it. You've taken measures to think about climate change over the next 40 years in your project. Insurers really like that. They see that you've done your due diligence. You'll see these all over the place now. HSBC's Corporate Sustainability Report. It's been done in corporations for quite a long time now, but we're starting to bring it down to project level. Starting to get to these points now where the organisation will have a sustainability report, then each of your separate projects will have a sustainability report too. So it's a practice of measuring, disclosing and being accountable to all your stakeholders. We've got this new situation now where people are reporting their triple P&Ls, they're calling it. Puma are now having their accountants report integrated with their sustainability report. They used to be separate, okay? Here's our profit report, profit and loss report, this is how good our business is doing in terms of finance, and here's our sustainability report. The good companies are putting those together now because they're realising that 1 and 2 are the same. They're making the links between profit and sustainability. One thing you should always do though, you should always include positive and negative outcomes, okay? And that's a hard thing to get your head around. Why would I want to report what we didn't do well? But it's all about credibility. Okay, people look at these reports now and they usually get slated when they come out. Oh, look at HSBC's corporate report. How can you say that when you're displacing 30 billion people from this part of China where you're putting up a dam that you're financing? There was a lot of that going on at the time. The more transparent you are, the more likely it is to be taken as in goodwill. So an example, I guess, is the Olympics again. Always come back to the Olympics because they've got so much information out there. They had a big problem with their wind turbine. They were going to have a lovely wind turbine which is going to produce quite a lot of the energy for the media centre in the site. Didn't work, didn't quite get the calculations right, it wasn't really viable to do. But they wrote that up in their report anyway, and they said, look, we were aiming for, you know, 0 carbon or whatever it is they were aiming for. We didn't quite achieve it, we had an issue with this, and this is why we had an issue. But what we did do, and that immediately makes it more credible, okay? People will always forgive you if you apologise, okay? So people kind of say, oh, fair enough, they didn't quite achieve that, but they did do well. So always be transparent and honest. There were things to help you do that. This is the Global Reporting Initiative, the GRI. It's a global standard, widely used now by some of the big companies, reporting framework, developed through consensus-seeking multi-stakeholder processes. So basically businesses, governments, academics will all be involved in coming up with the best practice for reporting sustainability. It sets out performance indicators that you should put forward. And the guidelines, the latest version of the guidelines was 2006. There was a new version that's just come out in the last year. And they're free, okay? Absolutely free for you to go and download it to use and apply on a day-to-day basis. So if someone says to you, okay, well done, you're going to run this project, can you please make sure you report our progress in a sustainable manner? Then you can just go and say, okay, well, we'll use the global reporting framework. It's well known now, it makes you more credible, okay, than just putting it out of your hat at the end of the day, I guess. Sustainability reports based on this framework can be used to benchmark organisation performance against each other, so you can measure up industry performers about how they do. Reports should always include issues of significance, not just to the organisation, but also to the public. And the big thing about the Global Reporting Index is it is public, okay? So it's not just about what's important to you or your project, it's important to the world, if you like, significance. There's another system, integrated reporting, which is used in Europe quite a bit, demonstrates the linkages between the organisation's strategy, governance and financial performance, and it's all about trying to bring in environmental issues alongside issues to do with finance and money. So we're trying to show our economic performance and our sustainability performance in one place. And the most common response to reporting sustainability in the past has been these separate reports, as I said, but this is now we're starting to see these completely joined together. The two are going together. Puma have been the ones that have really been leading the fence. Puma, the people who make, sports gear, have been the ones that have really been held up as the leaders in this field for some reason, believe it or not. Their CEO is a little bit enlightened. He's seen the light somewhere, and they're coming up with these new ways of what they call their kind of sustainable profit and loss reports. They must be transparent. Don't hide anything, otherwise it's greenwashed and you get caught out. They must be readable. No legalese, no corporate speak. These are public documents. They have to be readable by the average person on the street. Holistic, and they must be robust. Otherwise they're not worth a thing. So just to sum up, we've touched a little bit on sustainability monitoring, evaluation assessment, some indicators and reporting. So hopefully you'll have done all of this, your report will be fantastic, and you'll have these brilliant corporate reports at the end of it, and your boss will shake you by the hand and promote you. That's the aim of it. Some further reading, as always, because I know you love further reading, especially when you're not examined against it. And some references at the end there. Okay, brilliant. And I'll see you in the seminars over the next couple of days. Yeah, sure. I'll just turn on video.